23,000 Americans have moved to Norway in the past decade. Not for a job transfer. Not for a semester abroad. They went looking for what they couldn't find at home anymore, and they found it in a country Americans have been told would never work. I'm talking about the American dream. You know, that promise that if you work hard, you can afford healthcare, send your kids to college, maybe even retire someday without eating cat food. Turns out it's thriving. Just not where you'd expect. Before we dive into the real numbers behind this migration, hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives into how different countries actually work, beyond the political talking points. Drop subscribed in the comments, and I'll know you're here for the full story, not just the headlines. Let's get into it. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why nurses, teachers, and software engineers are trading their American paychecks for Norwegian ones, even though Norway's income taxes can hit 40%. You'll see the actual numbers behind their quality of life. And you'll hear from people who made the move about what they gained, what they lost, and what nobody tells you about living in a so-called socialist paradise. Because here's what makes this story fascinating. These aren't people fleeing poverty or persecution. They're middle-class Americans with college degrees, walking away from the world's largest economy to a country of 5.5 million people where winter darkness lasts 4 months and a beer costs $12. Something's happening here that challenges everything we've been told about capitalism, socialism, and what actually makes a country work for its people. Let me introduce you to Sarah Mitchell. Sarah spent 8 years working overnight shifts in a Seattle emergency room. Made $68,000 a year. Decent money, right? Except her student loans from nursing school took $600 monthly. Her employer-sponsored health insurance, the good kind, cost another $450 per month, with a $3,000 deductible she hit every single year because she has type 1 diabetes. Her insulin and supplies ran another $200 monthly even with insurance. Do the math. That's over $15,000 a year just for the privilege of managing a chronic condition and paying off the degree that qualified her to save lives. In 2019, she moved to Oslo. Now she makes what converts to about $71,000. Yes, she pays more income tax, about 38% compared to the 22% she paid in Washington state. But here's where it gets interesting. Her nursing degree in Norway? Free. Her insulin and diabetes supplies? Capped at $260 per year total. Her health insurance premium? $0. Because healthcare isn't insurance-based. It's a public service funded by those taxes everyone complains about. When you run the actual numbers, Sarah takes home more usable income in high-tax Norway than she did in low-tax America. Not because she's paid dramatically more, but because she's not being nickel-and-dimed into poverty by the cost of existing. And she's not an outlier. According to data from the American Citizen Services section at the U.S. Embassy in Oslo, American migration to Norway increased by 41% between 2015 and 2023. The Norwegian Directorate of Immigration reports that Americans now represent one of the fastest-growing expat communities in the country, with primary motivations cited as healthcare access, work-life balance, and educational opportunities for children. A 2023 study from the Migration Policy Institute found that 68% of Americans emigrating to Nordic countries hold bachelor's degrees or higher. These aren't desperate refugees. They're educated professionals making calculated decisions about where their labor and taxes will actually improve their lives. Now, before you start packing your bags or typing angry comments about how I'm pushing socialist propaganda, let me be extremely clear about what this video is and isn't. This isn't an argument that Norway's system would work in America, or that it's perfect, or that everyone should move there. Norway has a population smaller than Minnesota, sits on massive oil wealth, and has a relatively homogeneous culture that makes certain social policies easier to implement and sustain. The economics and politics that work for 5.5 million people don't automatically scale to 330 million. What this is about is understanding what Americans are actually choosing when they make this move, what trade-offs they're accepting, and what that reveals about what's working and what's breaking in the American system. Because the most interesting part isn't that Norway does things differently. It's that Americans are increasingly willing to learn a new language, leave their families, and adapt to a completely foreign culture just to access things that used to be considered baseline American middle-class life. Let's talk about what they're actually getting. Henrik Olsen, an economist at the University of Oslo, studies comparative social welfare systems. When I looked at his research on the Norwegian model, one thing became clear: nothing is free. Norwegians pay for their healthcare, education, and social safety net. They just pay differently. The average Norwegian pays about 27% of GDP in direct taxes. For Americans, that number is around 17%. But here's what Americans miss when they celebrate their lower taxes. They're paying out of pocket for services Norwegians get through their tax system. A 2022 analysis from the Commonwealth Fund found that Americans spend an average of $12,300 per person annually on healthcare, about double what Norwegians spend through their taxes for comprehensive coverage. An American making $60,000 might pay $10,000 in federal and state taxes, then another $12,000 for healthcare, for a total of $22,000. A Norwegian making the equivalent pays about $19,000 in taxes and gets healthcare included. The Norwegian system isn't cheaper because it's magic. It's cheaper because it eliminates the profit margin, advertising budgets, and administrative complexity of a privatized insurance system. Norwegian hospitals aren't trying to maximize shareholder value. They're trying to keep people healthy. But here's the complication that doesn't fit neatly into either side's talking points. Norwegian healthcare isn't always faster or more cutting-edge than American care. Wait times for non-emergency procedures can stretch weeks or months. If you need a hip replacement and it's not urgent, you might wait 4 months in Norway. In the U.S., if you have good insurance or can pay cash, you might get it in 2 weeks. Innovation in medical technology and pharmaceuticals still happens disproportionately in the United States, partly because the profit motive drives investment. Norway benefits from medical advances they didn't fully fund. They're not freeloaders, they contribute to research, but the American system, for all its catastrophic failures in access and affordability, does produce medical innovation at scale. This is the nuance that's missing from most conversations about healthcare. The American system is exceptional at cutting-edge care for people who can access it. The Norwegian system is exceptional at making sure everyone can access good care. Neither is perfect. Both have trade-offs. And those trade-offs become really personal when you're the one making them. Michael Chun moved from Austin to Stavanger in 2021. He's a software developer who took a 20% pay cut to make the move. In Austin, he made $130,000. In Stavanger, he makes closer to $104,000 after conversion. Sounds like a terrible financial decision, right? Except Michael works 37.5 hours per week. By law, that's standard full-time in Norway. He gets 5 weeks of paid vacation. Not negotiable, not dependent on seniority, just standard. When his daughter was born last year, he took 12 weeks of paid paternity leave. His wife took 9 months. In Austin, he regularly worked 50 to 55-hour weeks. His company offered 2 weeks vacation, but the culture made it clear that actually using it showed lack of commitment. When his first child was born in Texas, he took 5 days off and worked from home for another week, checking emails between diaper changes. Here's what this looks like in actual time. Michael worked about 2,860 hours per year in Austin. In Stavanger, he works about 1,760 hours. That's 1,100 hours less. That's 27 full 40-hour work weeks he gets back every year. His hourly rate in Austin was about $45. In Stavanger, it's about $59. He makes less total money. But he's paid more per hour of his life, and he gets a third of his waking hours back to spend not working. For Michael, that math worked. His wife disagrees with him sometimes. She misses Austin's tech scene and career opportunities. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a trade-off. But here's what started happening that Michael didn't expect. Without the constant pressure to perform and the fear of losing health insurance, he started sleeping better. His anxiety decreased. His marriage improved because he was actually present for dinner and bedtime routines instead of being on Slack until 10 p.m. A 2023 OECD study on work-life balance ranked Norway second globally, with workers averaging 1,590 hours annually. The United States ranked 29th, with workers averaging 1,811 hours. That's 221 more hours per year, 5.5 extra weeks of work. Those hours compound over a career. Over 40 years, that's 8,840 extra hours. 4.2 years of your life spent at work instead of with your family, pursuing hobbies, or just existing as a human being instead of a productivity unit. Now here's where experts disagree. Some economists argue this is precisely why American GDP per capita is higher. Americans are more productive because they work more hours, and that productivity creates wealth that improves living standards overall. Others counter that productivity per hour worked is actually higher in Norway, and that exhausted, stressed workers with no work-life balance aren't actually more productive. They're just more present. The data supports both positions depending on how you measure. American GDP per capita is about $80,000. Norway's is about $99,000, though that's inflated by oil revenue. Productivity per hour worked is roughly comparable when you control for industry composition. What's clear is that this isn't a simple story of one system being objectively better. It's a question of what you're optimizing for. Maximum total economic output or maximum human flourishing per hour of human effort. Different people will answer that differently, and that's fine. What's not fine is pretending the trade-off doesn't exist. Let's talk about the thing that blows most American minds: education. Jennifer Lawson moved to Tromsø with her husband and 2 teenagers in 2020. Her daughter is now at the University of Bergen studying marine biology. Her son is in his final year of Norwegian high school. Total cost for her daughter's bachelor's degree, about $600 per year in semester fees. That's it. No tuition. The Norwegian government considers higher education a public good that benefits society, so society funds it through taxes. Before they moved, Jennifer and her husband had opened a $529 college savings plan and were putting away $400 monthly, trying to save enough to cover even partial costs for 2 kids at an Arizona state school. Over 18 years, that would have been about $86,000 saved, which might have covered 2 years for 1 kid at current tuition rates. In Norway, her kids will graduate debt-free. They'll start their careers without $50,000 in student loans hanging over them, without that monthly payment that forces them to take jobs they hate because they can't afford to take risks. But, and this is important, Norwegian higher education isn't identical to American education. The system is less focused on the college experience that Americans romanticize. There are fewer fancy facilities, less hand-holding, and much more independent study. Norwegian students are expected to be self-directed learners. Grade inflation isn't a thing. A C is genuinely average, and plenty of competent students get CS. Also, admission is competitive. High school grades matter enormously, and you can't just pay your way into a mediocre university because you're willing to take on debt. The trade-off for free education is that not everyone gets access to exactly the program they want immediately. Some Americans actually prefer the U.S. system for this reason. If you have money, you have options in America. You can buy access to education regardless of your academic performance. In Norway, merit matters more and money matters less, which sounds great until your kid doesn't get into their first choice program. And here's what we're still learning about these systems. Does the Norwegian model produce better educational outcomes? Depends on how you measure. Norwegian students score well on international assessments, but American universities dominate global rankings at the highest level. Norway produces well-educated citizens with less debt. America produces both enormous student debt and also most of the world's breakthrough research. Maybe both things can be true. Maybe the systems optimize for different goals, and which one is better depends entirely on what you're trying to achieve. Here's what the Americans I interviewed all mentioned eventually. Norway is hard. The winter darkness in northern Norway is genuinely oppressive. From November to January in Tromsø, the sun doesn't rise above the horizon. You go to work in darkness. You come home in darkness. Seasonal affective disorder is common enough that light therapy lamps are subsidized by the healthcare system. The cold is relentless. The culture is reserved in ways that make it difficult to build friendships. Norwegians have a concept called fredagstaco, Friday tacos, where families stay home together. It's cozy and lovely if you're Norwegian with an established family and friend network. If you're an American expat trying to build community, those closed doors feel isolating. Learning Norwegian is mandatory for most permanent residency paths, and it's not an easy language. The grammar is manageable, but the pronunciation and the regional dialects make it genuinely difficult. After 3 years, Michael Chun can have basic conversations, but he still struggles with professional Norwegian in meetings. The cost of living is punishing for anything that isn't covered by the social safety net. Restaurant meals, alcohol, and consumer goods are eye-wateringly expensive because of high taxes and import costs. That $12 beer I mentioned earlier, that's standard. A casual dinner for two easily runs $80 to $100. Jennifer Lawson's family spends about 40% more on groceries than they did in Phoenix, even though they eat more simply now. Amazon doesn't exist the same way. Selection is limited. The consumer convenience Americans take for granted just isn't there. And career advancement can be slower. The Norwegian workplace values consensus and equality, which means individual high performers don't shoot up the ladder the way they might in a more competitive American environment. If you're ambitious and driven, that can feel stifling. These aren't small things. They're real quality of life issues that matter day to day. Several Americans I found in online expat forums eventually moved back. One woman from California lasted 18 months before deciding the darkness and social isolation weren't worth the benefits. A couple from North Carolina went back after 4 years because they missed their extended family and the career opportunities they'd left behind. This isn't a magic solution to American problems. It's a different set of problems that some people prefer. So what's really happening here? The Americans moving to Norway aren't making an ideological statement about capitalism versus socialism, though they're often accused of that. They're making a practical calculation about where their labor translates into the kind of life they want to live. They're choosing comprehensive health care over maximum career earnings. They're choosing time with their families over climbing the corporate ladder. They're choosing free education for their kids over slightly higher take-home pay. These are reasonable preferences. They're also not universal preferences, and that's fine. What's fascinating is that these choices reveal something about what's changed in America. The Americans leaving aren't radical leftists. They're nurses, teachers, software developers, and accountants who did everything they were supposed to do, got educated, worked hard, played by the rules, and found themselves still struggling to afford health care, still drowning in student loans, still burning out from 60-hour work weeks. The American dream used to mean that hard work guaranteed security and opportunity. For an increasing number of middle-class Americans, that guarantee feels broken. And when they look around at other developed countries, they see systems where hard work actually does translate into security. Norway isn't socialist, by the way. Not technically. It's a capitalist economy with strong social democratic policies and a robust welfare state funded by high taxes and oil revenue. Private businesses exist and thrive. Competition drives innovation. People get rich. It's just that the baseline of security is higher and the penalties for bad luck or illness are lower. The real question isn't whether Norway's system is better than America's in some abstract sense. The real question is whether America's system is working for Americans. And for a growing number of people, the answer is no. That doesn't mean everyone should move to Norway. Most people can't, and most people wouldn't want to even if they could. Family ties matter. Cultural comfort matters. Language matters. Being an immigrant is hard regardless of the destination country's policies. But it does mean we should probably examine why educated, employed middle-class Americans are increasingly willing to become immigrants just to access healthcare and work-life balance. Maybe the lesson here isn't that Norway has all the answers. Maybe it's that America has stopped asking the right questions. Here's what you can do with this information. First, if you're actually considering a move to Norway or any other country, do your research beyond the Instagram perfect versions. Talk to real expats. Join expat forums. Understand the visa requirements, which are strict. Norway isn't just giving out residency to anyone who shows up. You typically need a job offer, family ties, or admission to a Norwegian university. Second, whether or not you ever move anywhere, think about what you're actually optimizing your life for. Are you working 80 hours a week to afford healthcare and save for college because that's what you want, or because that's what American economic structure forces you to do? Those are different things. Third, vote and advocate based on what you learn about how other systems work. You don't have to want Norway's exact system to recognize that certain policies, paid parental leave, healthcare not tied to employment, affordable education, might be worth fighting for domestically. And finally, stop treating this like a binary choice between perfect systems. Norway has problems. America has problems. Different problems that hurt different people in different ways. The goal isn't to declare a winner. The goal is to understand the trade-offs clearly enough to make informed decisions about what we want our society to look like. Every source I use for this video is linked in the description below. The migration data, the economic studies, the work-life balance research, all of it. If you want to dig deeper, it's all there. So here's my question for you. If you could redesign the relationship between work, taxes, and quality of life from scratch, what would you prioritize? What would you be willing to trade? I'm genuinely curious how people with different backgrounds and values would answer that. So let's have that conversation in the comments. And if you found this useful, I've got related videos on healthcare systems around the world and the real costs of American college education that add more context to these questions. If you want more reality checks on how the world actually works, not the political talking points, not the Instagram fairy tales, but the real data and real trade-offs, hit that subscribe button right now. I break down these systems every week so you can make informed decisions about your own life. Don't just watch, join the conversation. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Think carefully. Choose intentionally. And whatever you decide about where to live and how to build your life, make sure it's based on real information and not just the stories we tell ourselves about how things have to be.